Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Stan Lemons with thesecrettowriting.com, and I'm thrilled that you all have joined the webinar this evening. It's always a pleasure to have you, and this is to join the Secret to Writing events. This today's presentation is really the kickstart of the Expanding College Opportunity Speaker Series, and I am especially delighted to have our guest, Dr. Linda Dagradi, with us today. I will just say right off the bat, I met Dr. Dagradi when I was taking a continuing education course at UCLA, my alma mater, on college financial aid, and she was a professor and was a great professor, and I thought, oh well, let me, I wanted to reach out to her to see if she would be willing to share all of her knowledge and experience with those of you, and she was kind enough to agree to spend some time with us. So as far as the format for today, how we're planning on conducting the presentation is I will pretty much be quiet, and I'll sort of turn the reins over to Dr. Dagradi, and she will really give an introduction of herself and then lead in with a short presentation. I may interrupt along the way. I hope that's okay. A little bit, and but after she goes through the presentation, then I have many of you were kind enough to send in some questions, so I will ask those questions, and we'll just treat it as a conversation. And then you're also welcome, as we're going through, if you think of questions, feel free to type those in the chat, and I will look at those as well. So with that said, because I certainly want to take advantage and maximize our time here, I'm going to turn the mic over to our guest speaker, and I again welcome you and thank you so much for being with us.
It's a pleasure to be on this webinar, and hopefully the information that I provide and you provide tonight will be helpful to people as they plan for college. It's been a long road for me. I've been in and around financial aid and college financing since the mid-1970s. Spent several stints at four different private institutions. I have been a College Board trustee in the process. As a director of financial aid, I was elected by the New England region. I also chaired the College Board's Financial Aid Standards and Services Advisory Committee. When I decided to get out of financial aid for a little bit, in graduate school, I had gotten certified as a guidance counselor. So I went back to school to be a guidance director and learned a lot during that time in terms of college financing from a different perspective. And I learned a lot when my daughter went to college. So along the way, I have worked for the College Board. I was most recently, my full-time job was the Vice President for Enrollment Management at a local, I live in Massachusetts in Springfield, at American International College. And I left that position to do some consulting, which I've been enjoying for the last few years, and teaching at UCLA Extension in the College Counseling Certificate Program for about I don't know, about 15 years now. So it's a combination of experiences along the way. I've taught in storefronts. I've done professional development in boardrooms. So I'm hoping that tonight's short presentation, and I will admit that I'm going to probably talk pretty fast, will help you get a primer on the whole business of college financing, because a lot of people find it daunting. But it's really not. So if you take it one step at a time, I think you can move a mountain if you do it one shovelful at a time. And if you start early and plan and practice, you'll be able to get through it. If you wait till the last minute, it'll be the equivalent of throwing a stick of dynamite into that mountain, and you will obviously be more stressed. So my goal tonight is to try to provide some information and some resources for you to relieve your stress a bit, and to reassure you that it's possible to finance a college education, even at some of the most expensive schools in the country. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen?
I can, and I think
Oh, okay.
I think our audience should be good.
Okay, so, and then, so I have to figure out how to get out of this little mode here. Okay, so I'm going to tell you about 10 things that I think you should know about financial aid, and they're pretty broad kinds of things. So along the way, going to deal with issues related to college costs, the complexity, financial data, and excuse me for a second. Okay. The embarrassment that some people feel, and the other negative piece that people get involved in, is they assume that they're not eligible, and so they really don't fill out a lot of financial aid applications. I'm going to emphasize two very important things in this process. There is no hesitation on my behalf to say that communication and planning are probably two of the most important things that you can do. So here are some of the things that we are going to, oh, and by the way, I'll go back to this because this cartoon used to hang on the door of my office when I was the director of financial services at Smith, because this is what a lot of families and parents fear. So I can honestly tell you that you will be going to graduation without wearing a barrel, and that you can do it without sacrificing your retirement and your whole life savings. These are the topics that I'm going to quickly address as we go through. Survival skills, the most important one, a little bit of information about cost and financial aid application issues, introduce you to the financing delivery system and the forms, talk a little bit about the kinds of financial aid, particularly loans, and my tack on taking what I think are good enrollment decisions, a process that you can follow. So, and give you some resources that you can take advantage of. This is a maze. So there is no alternative to getting organized, because otherwise you will have a hard time getting through the process. You're going to collect a lot of information. You're going to set up a calendar to check list deadlines and priority dates. And by the way, treat a priority date as if it were a deadline. If schools run out of money at the deadline and you apply late, they may not be in a position to be able to help you. The other thing that you can do before you even get started is to assess your own affordability. What do you think you can afford to pay to put your children or yourself through college? And develop a plan for doing that. How much out of resources that you have saved, or how much out of income can you use to pay a loan? Make sure that you communicate effectively. And that means sitting down, starting out, I always tell people to start out with a powwow at the kitchen table, and talk to your son or daughter, or your spouse, if it's just the two of you, about what you're going to need to do in order to get through this process. The other two things I think you need to do is check assumptions. Schools, if you assume that if I make a mistake, it'll be okay, I can correct it. If you make a mistake and you don't find out about it, or you assume that a school is just going to give you as much money as you need to go, you may be making an unfortunate assumption. So develop some realistic expectations and identify the questions that you have. Going back to getting organized, there's nothing that takes the place of setting aside a place where you are going to house copies of all the things that you do, so that everything is in one place. I tell people when I do financial aid sessions that you can't, when I used to walk into my daughter's room, my first objective was to find the floor. And you need to know that in the financial aid process, all the mail goes to the student, whether it's email or snail mail. that all goes to the student. So you want to make sure that that powwow that you have at your kitchen table is connected to the student in some way. They need to know what you're going to need, when you're going to need it. They need to know when they get a communication that they should let the parent know right away. As far as college cost goes, it's no news to say that sticker shock is a problem. We have colleges, I live in Massachusetts, some of the most expensive schools in the country are in my backyard. Some of them now well over $70,000 a year. And that includes both direct and indirect costs. Indirect costs are things that sometimes families underemphasize. If your son or daughter is going to school cross country, you need to make sure that there's enough in your budget so that you can get them back and forth to home, unless you want to mail Johnny out somewhere and then collect him 4 years later. So indirect costs can include things that don't appear on a bill, but there may be money for the laundromat or the midnight pizza runs or some entertainment for the student or things that you can't send in a care package from home. Now, a lot of people make the mistake of looking at that sticker price and saying, I can't afford it, so I'm not even going to let my son or daughter apply there. That's a mistake. When you're constructing your applications, you should pay attention to schools that are cost effective for you right off the bat. But don't deny the fact that some of the most expensive schools in the country give out more financial aid. So it's not your sticker shock cost that you're worried about. It's the cost after the financial aid decisions are in. And the other cost issue I think related is the projected borrowing that both the parent and the student might have to do. There is an opportunity cost to not borrowing, but most college financial aid applications that are awarded receive some loan in their package. And so it's important to talk to the student about borrowing and what that means. So I've already mentioned about looking at sticker versus net cost. Net cost is the cost to the family after financial aid is awarded, and that your application set should have a range of schools that meet the fit factors. Fit factors are things like academics, co-curricular activities, social events, location, and certainly affordability. When it comes down to looking at admissions decisions and financial aid applications, some schools do pay attention to whether or not a student has applied for financial aid when they make admissions decisions. These are called need-aware, need-sensitive schools. Need-blind schools do not. So it's always a good idea to know the schools you're applying to and what their admission decision policy is. However, if you need help to send the student to that school, then you have really, I think, no choice but to apply for financial aid and let the decisions roll, both admissions and financial aid. And then, only then, after you get both admissions and financial aid decisions, can you determine affordability. So one of the things that the financial aid system often presents people with is a big puzzle. There's partners. There's a lot of terms and jargon. Every profession has its own language, and financial aid college financing is no different than any other. You may have to fill out a bunch of forms, and you may be unaware of the types of aid. So partners are mainly 4 types: the federal government, state government, and the home state you live in, the colleges and universities to which you apply, and agencies and scholarship providers that might either be national or local. In terms of forms, everybody is going to fill out the free application for federal student aid, affectionately known in my office as the F form, for federal, that is. And some schools will ask for the College Board's profile application, which is a more comprehensive form than the FAFSA. And some schools even have their own institutional application. How will you know? Your research should tell you what applications the school wants when they want them. And it's important for you to follow those guidelines. Some states have a separate form that you have to fill out, and certainly private scholarships do too. One note I think about filing forms, a lot of things are done online. Profile is completely online, and the FAFSA is almost 95% of filers do it online, which is, I think, the most effective and easy way to do it. However, if you wait until the last minute and something happens, like I sit here in New England and we're having a snowstorm, and so if we lost power and I had to have my FAFSA in tonight, I wouldn't be able to do it. So give yourself some time. There's about a 2-week turnaround time for FAFSAs and about a 4-day turnaround time for profiles. And snail mail, obviously, if you're mailing applications, take longer. So when you set up your calendar, make sure that you allow time for mailing or sending or errors to happen, because they might very frankly happen. In terms of the kind of financial aid, everybody wants gift aid. These are grants or scholarships. They're either based on somebody's definition of need or they're merit scholarships, and you don't have to pay them back, which is the best thing about them. Many and most financial aid packages, however, include self-help, which are 2 forms: loans that have to be repaid and work study. I think it's important for students to do a little work while they're in school. And in fact, research shows that students who work on campus while they're in school do better academically and persist to graduation in greater numbers than students who do not. That doesn't mean that they'd be working 50 hours a week. Most schools limit the amount of time a student can work, and most schools will confine their loans to the federal ones, which is the best thing for any student. Institutional merit awards are completely different. Many times you don't have to apply for a merit award from an institution. They're given automatically based on an academic, athletic, special talent, a leadership award. Again, how do you find out about them? By looking at the school's website, by reading their literature, and by letting them inform you about what you have to do in order to qualify. Athletics is obvious because you'll be working with a coach. Not all scholarships are full scholarships, and not all schools that you may be interested in are able to offer athletic scholarships. Those are only offered in the NCAA in Divisions 1 and 2. Division 3 does not award athletic scholarships. But those merit awards may or may not be renewable. They may have academic criteria attached to renewability. So those are important questions for you to consider and ask. And when you're looking for locals for scholarships, I always tell people to go to the Duct Tape Scholarship Award. They have these 2 were the 2020 award winners, and they got $10,000 for their efforts. The young man said that he spent about 80 hours creating his tux and duct tape. But wow. There are several search engines that you can use. There's one on Big Future. There are a number of them. There's Scholarship Monkey. They're all over the place. One of the things that I would suggest that you do is start early looking for private scholarships. Don't pay to apply to any of them. And don't forget to look at local programs. Just as one politician said, all politics is local, all scholarships, good scholarship searches are local too, but they're not local just in geography. They're local to you. They're local in terms of your affiliation with an organization, your ethnicity, your heritage, your parents' place of work, or belonging to a union. All of those things can bring a scholarship closer to the student. So start early looking for those, because once you get to senior year, it becomes really difficult to manage everything that goes on at that point in time. The reason that you fill out those forms, the FAFSA or the profile, is because aid that's based on need has to have a way to determine whether or not the family can afford to send the student to college or not. Because the base philosophy of need-based aid is based on the principle that the family has the first responsibility to pay for college costs to the extent of their ability. And that ability is what is determined by the forms you fill out, FAFSA and profile. They are looking to supplement family resources with financial assistance, not to replace family resources. And so one of the discussions that you need to have with the student is what's affordability and what's your ability from your perspective in terms of your ability to pay for school, because that's a very important thing to know. So need-based aid is simply the cost of education, and that includes both direct and indirect costs. Financial aid folks will include a bit of information and cost for things like travel back and forth to home, even for, especially for commuters, but also for personal expenses. If the student needs special tutoring, those things can be included in the cost. The forms are used to determine the family contribution, and that comes out of formulas. And the best place to play around with that is to go to the College Board's Big Future website and look at their family contribution calculators. That will give you some idea about how the formulas work. But know this, whatever you do on a website calculator is not the final word. So filling out the forms and allowing financial aid folks at the various institutions to which you're going to apply to work their magic is the best approach that you can take. When you end up, after all, getting all those financial aid awards, you can and should evaluate them in terms of not just the total amount of aid, but what's in the package. If 65% of the package is loan money, may not be as good as if 95% of the package is gift aid. How much will the student have to borrow over a period of the enrollment, not just the first year, but in subsequent years? And what does that net cost to you? After you take the cost of attendance, subtract financial aid, that's your net cost. Is that in your affordability range? And one of the most important things that people forget is that they have to renew. If the student is in a 4-year program, you're going to be filling out financial aid forms for 4 years. And what you need to know is whether the aid that institution gave you is renewable or not. Will it go up in future years? How are the renewal packages managed? Those are important questions, and they can only be answered at the specific college level. Know that even though you're filling out federal forms and a profile which is centrally processed, all financial aid decisions are made on each individual campus. And so some programs, you might have the same eligibility, like a federal student loan might be the same from school to school. But when it comes to gift aid, that's going to vary because schools are like families. They all have different budgets, they all have different resources, and they have different goals as to how they're going to fill their class. So you may not get the same kind of financial aid package from 2 schools, even if they cost about the same amount of money. Again, I would send you to the Big Future website because there's an award letter calculator that may help you do that kind of evaluation. So what happens if you don't get enough money? Or another school gave you more, but you like school A better than school B? You can always appeal. If you have a family situation that wasn't evident when you filed the FAFSA profile, that might be reason for you to put that in writing, contact the school, share that information. Colleges do have some flexibility to make student-specific decisions about how they're going to treat family resources. But if they don't know about your story, they can't do anything about it. And sometimes the award just isn't enough. So you're looking for, you're just looking to request additional money. Nothing has changed. And again, how to find out how to appeal? Well, you can start with a phone call or an email, but look on the college's website and make sure you know what their appeal process is like. And I think it's really important during that family powwow to have a discussion about educational debt. With the exception of, I think there are, I don't know how many schools, but there are a handful of schools in the country that do not include student loans as part of their award packages. They only do gift aid and maybe some work study. But most institutions are going to include some form of loan amount in a student's financial aid package. So there are opportunity costs to borrow, but there are opportunity costs to not borrow. And so really the important thing is to borrow prudently. If you stay with just the federal student loan programs, that's the best way to go. Try to avoid going beyond the federal student aid programs into private lender education loans. Every bank has an education loan. Sometimes it's a home equity loan with a college wrapper around it. The student, if possible, should not borrow more than the federal programs, but have that discussion about paying for cost. It's gotten to the point now where in this generation, the children of baby boomers tend to return home after graduation in greater numbers than in generations before. Sociologists actually have a name. They're called boomerangs. If you are looking forward to the empty nest at some point, you want to make sure that if the student borrows, they're not borrowing so much that it will cripple them after graduation. And again, mapping your future is a great place to go to play around with loan amounts and to project what the student will have to pay. A good rule of thumb is to not take debt that's greater than 15% of the student's projected gross annual income for a monthly payment. So from my perspective, enrollment decisions are a process. And I want to tell you a story that will indicate to you a bit about that process and what you can do. Time is involved. You need to do some research. You need to spend time talking with people and getting involved, evaluating college visits and whether that school is really what you thought it was when you researched it online. There's a process to all of this. So you're taking an enrollment trip, so to speak. And let me tell you this, just one story about a dad who called me in early July one year, and he was in a panic. So during the conversation, I learned that when his son did his college search, he had a hard time making up his mind out of the 4,000 odd schools. He couldn't filter it down, so he ended up applying to 21 schools. That's a lot. Out of those 21 schools, and that's the first phase of this enrollment decision process, you get to decide where you're going to apply and to how many schools you're going to apply to. The second phase is the admissions decision phase, and you have less control over that, but you have to make sure that you get all your credentials in and make sure everything's in on time and that you follow it up for all the things that they've asked for. But it's really, you lose control over after that because this college gets to make its decisions, and some schools are very selective. Harvard, I think, accepted like 6% of the students this year. Other schools are open enrollment, and some accept up to 80–90% of the students who apply. The third step is the financial aid step. So this dad let his son apply to 21 schools. He got accepted at about 16 or 17 of them, I think, as I remember. And the third step are the financial aid decisions. So they got financial aid decisions from those 15 or 16 schools. Again, you don't have control over the kind of decision, but you have control over getting everything in on time and asking a lot of questions and getting those questions answered so that you have the opportunity to make an enrollment decision once those aid packages are in, to see if the school is not only fit for the student in terms of the academic and co-curricular stuff, but also if it's affordable. That last step in the process is the most important one, and that's the enrollment decision. So the father, and May 1 is usually the time when colleges want to know from students if they're coming or not. And so when they got down to May 1, evidently the student still had trouble making up his mind, and he applied, told his father that he wanted to, these 5 schools were on his list, his final list. So his father paid 5 enrollment deposits, which are non-refundable. Cost him, in those days, they were about $200 a piece. This was a while ago. And he spent over $1,000 on enrollment deposits. He called me in July because he was worried. His son went to 5 orientations in the month of June. And once you go to those orientations and you start getting information about your roommate and, you know, that sort of thing. Well, in July, the business office gets involved and starts sending bills. And the father said to me, I have 5 bills in front of me. What do I do? And I politely said, okay, you have to do now what you should have done in April. And that is, he's got to make a decision because you can't clone him. He can only go one place. So all that to say that enrollment process is something that you can start doing now so that it's not compressed into a very short period of time. Continue to filter schools, get more information. The school that was number 10 on your list might end up to be number 2 on your list by the time that process is all over. But make sure that you're doing your research and asking lots of questions along the way so that when it comes time to make that enrollment decision, you've had the opportunity to look at some of these resources. I tell people that one of the great things about the internet is that there's lots of information, and that one of the terrible things about the internet is that there's lots of information. You will be overwhelmed by information, and a lot of it is duplicating information from one site to another. So my favorite sites are places like the Big Future and the federal government's College Affordability Transparency Center. The feds also have a Student Aid Information Center, which has a lot of information. Mapping Your Future. College websites are crucial. You should make sure that you visit every college website on your application list, and state websites are really important too. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Stan and see what we can see. I hope this quick review of the college financing process has been helpful.
Wow. I must say that was amazing. I mean, thank you, Dr. Dagradi. That was really fantastic. And I mean, you covered so much in a very short period of time. I think that this is a great time now to sort of shift gears. And what I'd like to do, and I wrote down here several questions that many of you participants sent in. And so I'll ask those now. And I recognize, let me also say that you may have covered some of this along the way, but I'll just kind of go through some of the
Never hurts to hear it twice.
It never hurts to hear it twice, exactly. All right, so first question, Monica from McLean, Virginia asks, how do sports and academics play a role in securing scholarship dollars?
Well, if you're looking at athletic scholarships, obviously the students' achievement in athletics is really the predominating factor. Otherwise, if you're just applying to, say, the Okefenokee Scholarship Committee's award, sport involvement becomes another factor that the student has been involved with to round out their resume. If the student has leadership positions in a sport, team captain, that sort of thing, it can affect what the student, how the committee who's reviewing scholarships looks at it. So that's for private scholarships. At the college level, there's the athletic scholarship, obviously, where they could care less whether you're a great student or not, as long as you're admissible to the college. But if you're a great athlete, then the coach may offer you some financial assistance. The one thing that you need to pay attention to when it comes to that is that even the NCAA has renewability criteria. So the student has to stay academically eligible while they're in school. So if the school is a reach for the student academically, they need to make sure that the school offers a good athletic counseling and advising program so the student can get the academic help and support that they need. Mm-hmm. In the admissions decision, many schools use academics only in terms of making their merit scholarship awards, unless they're offering leadership awards or special talent awards. So it's hard to say, and that's one of the confusing things among colleges, because every school has a little bit of a different take on how they look at things. Schools with merit programs oftentimes will post on their websites what their criteria are, testing, academic, GPA, background, that sort of thing. So it's good to keep track. So when you're finding yourself interested in a school and you know they have merit awards, well, it wouldn't be improper to say to the admissions counselor that's working with you, how about my involvement in sports? Will that help me get a better scholarship, even though I'm not looking at an athletic scholarship? Ask those kinds of questions of the schools themselves, because they're the ones that are going to be making the offer.
Terrific. Okay. You know, a lot of the questions that I have, people are definitely interested in scholarships, which is understandable. So the next question is from Tina in Dallas, Texas. She writes or asks, how do we access free money?
Well, free money is gift aid. Free money is either scholarship, which can come from a private organization, or it can come from the institution itself. Some states have gift aid programs, so it will depend on, like, I'm struggling to remember what Texas does for its students, but you can look at the state, at the Texas State Financial Aid website and see what free money they offer and what you have to do to get it. Now, some places, for example, here in Massachusetts, there is a scholarship program at one of the flagship universities in the state that is not based on anybody's definition of financial need. However, they don't require it for awarding, but to actually get the money dispersed, the student has to fill out a FAFSA. And they do that not because they're going to change their minds, but they want to make sure that students are applying for absolutely everything they can in terms of money for college. So they require it for disbursement, but not for awarding. The biggest source of gift aid is likely, for most families in terms of scholarship, is likely to come from the institutions themselves. Some schools spend extraordinary amounts of money offering both need-based gift aid and scholarship gift aid. So when I started the presentation, I mentioned that people assume they wouldn't be eligible for need-based gift aid or need-based aid. You know, there's only one way to find out. If you don't go through the process and apply for financial aid, you'll never know if you're missing out on money that you could have gotten. And I've had this happen, really hundreds of times with families who I'd say, did you do that? No, I'm never going to be eligible. And, you know, one year I had a parent, she didn't apply for the state money, and I kept telling her she was eligible, and she said, no, my next door neighbor told me that I wouldn't be, and so I didn't. And third year, she took the form and she checked off the box and forgot that she was not going to apply for state aid, and she got a $3,600 state scholarship. So don't assume that you're not eligible for need-based aid. At least fill out the FAFSA. I've been out of Smith since 2003, so it's dated information, but back in 2003, the average grant from the college was $22,000. So that, in those days, with the cost of attendance being in the mid-30s, that was a lot of money. But you had to apply for it to get it. So scholarship aid is one thing. You look for free money. The scholarship search engines that are on the web are a good place to start. Locally, school guidance offices tend to have files of local scholarships. I serve on a scholarship review committee in our area. There's an organization called the Community Foundation. One application gets you into consideration for almost 200 scholarships. So there may be those kinds of resources in the local community. Where you work, where you worship, where you fraternal organizations that you might be involved in may offer money for students. Unions sometimes will offer money. My local supermarket offers money to patrons, children of patrons who go to the supermarket and who work there. So sometimes a student is working part-time in high school, and lo and behold, the place they work offers some scholarships for them. So there's lots of sources. The issue is you start early looking for them because it is rather time consuming. There's no one place that you can go except for filling out the free application for federal student aid. And that gets you into financial aid programs at as many schools as you choose to apply. So I wouldn't rule out the school-based financial aid programs because you may be missing out if you do.
Okay, terrific. And when you said, you've mentioned Smith, just for clarification to the audience, that's Smith College, which is where you were in Northampton, Mass.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay. Right. All right.
Now, that's an important thing to note. There are a selection of colleges across the country that do not offer merit scholarships. They tend to be the more selective institutions. So if you're a high achieving, great high school student and you're the top of your class and you're applying to some of these very competitive selective schools, know that their financial aid is almost exclusively need-based. But some of those very same schools have institutional decisions. They don't just go by the federal form. They go by their own financial aid routine. And it's some of them, if the family income is like $125,000 a year, they will still qualify for no loan package and need-based financial aid, gift aid. So if you're applying to that highly selective, small percentage of schools across the country, you may find that even if you have a substantive family income, that you might be eligible for need-based aid. Of gift aid, because I know she was more concerned about free money than anything else.
Sure.
There are a couple of national scholarship programs for students. The Gates Foundation has one. There's a couple of others that offer huge scholarships to students. The Gates Foundation one was like they paid for everything, everything, room, board, tuition, books, the whole Megillah. I know, for example, I have a friend whose son was a sophomore in college and he's in cybersecurity. He applied, got a Homeland Security scholarship that did that, paid for his last 2 years and his graduate program, complete living expenses, food, books, computer, tuition, all of that. And he does have to work after graduation for a while, not long actually, in order to quote, meet that community service things. So as part of the scholarship. So even the federal government does have a few. They tend to be in the health profession and in this cyber security area.
Okay. Another question, and I think this is particularly relevant now that we're still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and one parent made reference to the fact that her child is experiencing, that's the students' grades are a little bit lower right now because of issues related to maybe distance learning. I don't know the specifics in this case. So the question is, this is coming from a parent in Portland, Oregon. The question is, how big of a role will my child's GPA play when selecting a college and applying for scholarships?
Well, there's two different pieces to that. One, in terms of selecting the colleges. College counselors will tell you that you should have an application set that has a range of schools on it. You know, where you hear the words common, safety school, target school, reach school. So when you look at, like you're doing college search on Big Future and you look at the statistics, it says that 50% of the class comes with this range of test scores or this range of GPA. Gives you some sense as to where you fall or where the student falls in that, and whether or not they're a good fit. What's the percentage of students that are in a certain grade category that get accepted at that school. So there are places that you can go, like College Affordability and Transparency Center, that will take you to websites that are federally sponsored, or you can go to the College Board Big Future website to get a sense and talk to the college counselor or the school counselor to see where the schools that the student's interested in, where they might fall. Depending on the selectivity of the school, your GPA will have some impact on whether you're acceptable or not. Now, I've worked at schools that didn't accept very many students, and I've worked with schools that accepted, you know, a lot, 70, 80% of their students. So that's a separate admissions decision. A lot of schools construct their merit programs with a combination of GPA and test scores. Now with COVID, the test score issue becomes somewhat problematic, and a lot of those schools have sort of retooled how they're going to do their merit awards because many students were not able to sit for a standardized test like ACT or SAT. So schools may be changing some of that to accommodate people that couldn't take the test. But high school GPA makes a big difference in those programs. In the need-based side of the world, when a school accepts you, and by the way, you don't get a financial aid decision from the school until the admissions office has done their magic. So the school may decide that they're going to assist and give more assistance to the students who have better grades. When admissions people look at grades, when I was reviewing and reading applications for admission, you know, you like to see a trajectory of a student going, maybe they had a rough start, 9th grade, and they get better in 10th grade, 11th grade, 12th grade. By that time, they're taking honors classes. But sometimes you get the reverse. And I think what's going to happen now is a lot of colleges are sensitive to the fact that COVID brought us a revolution, unintended consequences of COVID. It was a revolution in how how educational services were provided to students through the K-12 level. Some remote, some all remote, some partially remote. So it's all over the place. And there is a lot of discussion now on college campuses and among admissions people about how student performance has been affected by the online offerings, which many students have had to deal with. People that don't, I had a mom in my town, she used to drive, they didn't have good internet access in her house. And so she used to drive to the library, sit in the parking lot with a computer so her son could, you know, could have a better access to computers. So there's been lots of issues like that that could affect a student's performance. So if the student has had a hard time with the online learning or with the separation from their friend group and, you know, the camaraderie of going to school and, you know, just hanging out with people and sports and that sort of thing, I think it's important for the family to let the scholarship entity or the admissions office know that that's been impacted. And if the school's counselor is writing a reference, it's not inappropriate for that to ask the counselor to say, could you talk about the fact that my son has been sort of negatively impacted by online learning and hasn't done as well as we think he's capable of. So there's no clear-cut answer because every school is going to be different. But if a school doesn't know that you have problems, I mean, I was just listening to a news report before I started talking on this show that talked about the suicide rate among elementary school students has increased. That's devastating. So how they're not insensitive to those kinds of things. They like to see that upward trajectory. But when something happens, I've had students fall apart when a parent passed away or got really sick and the grades were plummeting. You can see by a student's transcript that something's different. And the big question is what? And if the admissions office doesn't ask, then tell them. Communicate with them. That's part of when I mentioned about communication in the college financing process. I would extend that to admissions. You need to let people know because they may make decisions based on the information you provide so that they better understand the student. They don't just think the student is, goofing off.
So in that scenario, let's say an event did happen. Can you just clarify to whom would I, for example, who do I talk to? Who do I tell in admissions or even in financial aid, like that something's gone on?
Generally speaking, I think at the entry level for college admissions, you start with the admissions office. And usually the student will have an admissions counselor who's going to be reading their file, or, a lot of colleges do decide they separate their people sometimes by major, sometimes by geography. So different counselors will work on different groups. But usually there's a point of contact. And so that's the person that you start with. Find out who that person is. If you don't know, call the school and say, who's handling my son or daughter's admission application? We have some really important information we need to share. And so it may be that's one way to start with that phone call. The other thing might be helpful is to construct a statement. Have the student write a statement saying, the impact of COVID on my grades, has been devastating. It doesn't have to be COVID. It could be something else. My father, it could be, for example, nobody in the family's had COVID, but the school's been on, remote learning, and my dad lost his job, or my mom lost her job. And the two things together have put an enormous amount of stress on our family. Again, knowing that information may, I can't guarantee it, but I do know one thing. If you don't say anything, the college is going to look at the numbers on the transcript and the piece of paper that they get from the College Board for testing, if they took this test, and that's all they got to make a decision on. So humanize the process by communication. That's really important because most colleges are sensitive to the fact that students, and they're not automatons, they have ups and downs just like everybody else. And sometimes they come at a bad time. And this has been a bad time for a lot of juniors and seniors. They've gone through a lot. And so I think colleges will be sensitive to that. Don't feel like you're whining or complaining or, begging or any of that. You're just providing information. John was an honor student until COVID, and he's really struggled. I know as an instructor who's worked online, and I love teaching in a classroom because I like to see who I'm working with. There's a difference in the way you teach when you teach online and a difference in the way you study when you study online. And so some people are, my next door neighbor has a daughter who loves her online. She's excelling. Her younger brother is having a real hard time because he just doesn't, he needs that classroom attention. So it depends on the student. So make that information clear to whoever you're working with. And that means that if you're applying to 10 schools, then you got 10 phone calls to make or 10 letters to send.
Right. Okay, that's very helpful. So I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions.
Okay.
Um, so Alex from New York asks, does it make sense to save money or instead use savings to pay down the mortgage in terms of qualifying for financial aid?
Good question. Happens a lot. Um, I'm going to first make a comment about saving. I always tell people save what you can, even if it's nickels, pennies, and dimes in a glass bottle in the kitchen. You know, save whatever you can because savings will give you choices that people that don't have savings don't have. Second issue, the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid, and the federal student aid system does not look at your equity in your house as a resource. So if you use your savings to pay down your mortgage, it's not going to do you any good in that system because it doesn't ask for your information. When you fill out a FAFSA, your home is not an asset. Profile will request that information, but they relate the amount of asset information to the income of the family. So income is by far and away in need-based financial aid, whether it's the FAFSA, the federal side of things, or whether it's the institutional side of things. Income is the predominating factor in determining financial income, family size, number in college, are the really three cornerstones of the program to determine how big the family contribution is. That's a good case of go on the Big Future calculator and you put in your home equity and see how it changes. But for federal aid, not an issue. And many colleges that award their own gift aid use the federal system only. So there's only about 350 colleges in the country that use Profile. They tend to be the more expensive, they tend to be the more selective, and they tend to offer the most financial aid in terms of gift aid and need-based aid. So you can use the calculator to get a sense of what might happen. But in general, my advice to people is don't make any decisions that think you might position yourself better for financial aid because it may not be happening. You know, do I quit my job? Or does my wife quit her job? Or does my husband quit his job? Now, those things, live your life financially as you would, because if your son or daughter's in high school now, it's probably too late to make any of those changes anyway. And you can never tell. You think you might be positioning yourself for more aid, but it might backfire and you might end up hurting yourself. So having those savings in your account will mean that if something happens and you have a family emergency of some sort, whether it's illness or the sewer system backs up into your house or whatever happens, you have that money. You don't have to go out and borrow it. So don't make special, particularly big decisions about finances just to try to position yourself to get more financial aid. Most of the time that doesn't work. I've had people say, should I mortgage my house? I've paid my mortgage down. Should I mortgage my house so that if I look like I have more debt? No, not necessarily. You might want to do that at some point or another to help pay for college, but that's a decision you're going to make after you decide whether on a given school. So I wouldn't do those kinds of things to position yourself because it probably won't work, at least the way you would like it to work.
Terrific. I think we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes left, so I'm going to ask you one last question, and
Okay.
And I'll sort of try to ask this question in a way that perhaps it can apply to all our listeners. So the question is, you know, a lot of times I in particular try to reach out to families of younger kids, particularly middle school age kids, and so with the thought that it's helpful, I believe, for a family to really start thinking about college and financing college early. That being said, what advice would you give to families of middle school students, and in the course of your response, and any parting words of wisdom for our audience in general.
Whether it's elementary school or middle school, saving is really important because it sets an expectation. We're going to put aside any money you get for your birthday. We're going to take half of it and we're going to put it in your college fund, because that sends a message to the student that post-secondary education is going to be important to that family. So save whenever you can. The other issue for middle school in particular is to think about middle school as prep for high school. Once you get to the better you do in middle school, because you just don't turn learning on and off. So the better you do in middle school and the more attentive you are to your studies in middle school, the better you're going to be in high school. And when you get to high school, it's not that your middle school work doesn't count. Colleges won't see your middle school transcripts, but it will prepare the student academically to go through and take the most challenging programs you can. Don't be afraid to take a course that you might think might be too hard, because you want to challenge yourself. So you put yourself in that position. The other thing I think that's important for middle school families to think about is start thinking about now about planning for college. Don't wait until senior year. Do whatever you can now, whether it's saving money or encouraging the student to get a job, or maybe instead of buying that $150 pair of Nikes, you buy the $80 pair of Nikes, and you put that other money in an account. Encourage family members to support. My daughter got savings bonds when she was little from a family member for every birthday and every Christmas. That was part of the family gift. So those kinds of things are really important. The most important thing is to talk with the student about where they're going and what's important about planning. The student may decide, they don't have a clue. Most college students don't have a clue as to what they're going to be doing when they graduate. But I think it's important for families, parents, any adult in a student's life to make them aware that it's important to think about your future. It's going to change, things are going to happen, but you got to think about it now. So try stuff now that you might be interested in doing later on. All the while knowing that the more attention you pay to developing good study habits, the better you're going to be, the stronger student you're going to be, and that's going to position you better for post-secondary education, whether that's college or becoming an electrician. You're still going to have those skills that are really important to have.
And on that note, that was really fantastic. This has been an amazing conversation. I want to, on behalf of the entire secretToWriting.com organization, I want to thank Dr. Dagradi for being with us today. I really appreciate your taking the time to join us this evening. I know that the audience has learned and benefited a lot from your years of both education and experience. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please reach out to me. You can reach out to me directly via the secretToWriting.com website and email. I ask you to please stay tuned for our upcoming speakers next month. We have two speakers or two events scheduled, and you can find that information on the secretToWriting.com website under the Expanding College Opportunity Speaker Series. And please, 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 please tell your friends about this speaker series. The idea here is to really expand the opportunity for students of all backgrounds, regardless of who you are, where you come from, to open the door to higher education to you all. So again, I want to thank you all participants for joining us today. Again, I want to thank Dr. Dagradi for being so generous with her time and for being with us today. And I just want to say, have a great evening, and I look forward to you all joining us for the next event in the Expanding College Opportunity Speaker Series. Have a good evening.